Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we're going to talk about Restoration Druid Phase 5 BiS. It's going to be the same as the other videos, so this covers AQ40, AQ20, everything leading up to that, all the BiS items. And we're going to be doing 3 versions of the Druid in this video, instead of just like 2 like we did with the Shaman. We're going to do the, I would say the standard BiS, the one that I would probably use. Then we're going to do the 5-piece Tier 2 BiS, and then we're going to do the 8 out of 8 Tier 2 BiS. Now, whichever version you're using or whatever gear set you're using generally, even if you're using a gear set that's outside of these, you want to make sure you at least have 3-piece Tier 2. Because like the Priest 3-piece Tier 2, it allows 15% of your mana regeneration to continue while casting. You have 15% of your talents. This allows you to have 30% of your mana regeneration to continue while casting, which is a huge amount of mana. Especially because your spirit creeps up pretty high in all these setups, right? It's around like 400. So just very, very strong. And that's going to be like the biggest thing that you don't want to lose. So no matter what you're kind of planning out for BiS, you have to make sure you have 3 pieces of Tier 2 in. And those pieces are, luckily most of them are pretty good. On Druid, they might even be, on average, kind of better than Priest. So you can kind of take your pick. Obviously, we have selected what I consider the optimal ones, and we'll talk about that and why those are the optimal ones. But realistically, anything you can get your hands on kind of works there, okay? So we'll hop right in. We'll talk about the standard setup first, and then we'll kind of move on to the other stuff. So we'll go with the helmet first. It's the Don Rigobardo's Lost Hat. Now, again, Deviant Growth Cap is better. Right, you can make an argument for Crystal Adorned Crown. I would take Deviant Growth Cap if I had access to it, but it's just really difficult with the world bosses. Same story with all the other videos. Creeping Vine Helm, another close second, and then Celine Headdress is also great. Storm Rage cover's fine as well. It's obviously significantly less healing than the other options, but you get the MP5 and you do get an extra piece of your set. And if let's say you don't have the options to get BiS, okay, something like this is kind of nice because it does enable your 5 set and potentially your 8 set depending on what you use, right? And you basically have the option to use those tools even if you don't fully lean into them. Everybody seems to think that like if you're a Druid and you run 5-piece Tier 2, you have to be spamming regrowth, right? It doesn't work like that. Like, you can, use the regrowth where it's appropriate and then not use it where it's not appropriate. You don't have to just like lean into your set bonus. Same thing with Rejuvenation. You could have 8 out of 8 set on Druid because that's all you have. You don't have to cast Rejuvenation all the time, obviously. So just some thoughts there. And all those helms are pretty good, right? So into the next slot, same story as before. Best thing is Amulet of the Fallen God, but the really easy one to pick up is Amulet of the Shifting Sands, so nothing out of the ordinary there. For the shoulders, Wild Growth is again the standout. I would say the Storm Rage pauldrons are kind of like the second best, probably those combined with the Animalist Spalders, but again, the nice thing about having the Storm Rage Spalders is that they give you more utility in terms of if you want to flex into that 5-piece or 8-piece bonus. Going into the chest slot here, the Robes of the Guardian Saint, clear winner because Druid doesn't have access to something like the True Faith Vestments, so the MP5 is kind of huge here. I will say, don't sleep on the Storm Rage chest with the 1% crit, because if you want to look at things in pure throughput, it actually has very comparable throughput, and you're basically just missing the MP5. And realistically, you have 3 MP5 from this chest. Okay, so you're only missing like 4 MP5. You have basically the same amount of intellect, the same amount of resistances, and you could argue that the throughput is closer, so I would say that this Robes of the Guardian Saint, even though I would have it listed as technical BiS, it's not necessarily something you should be going for. And I would say that Storm Rage Chest Guard, generally speaking, is something that you can use very liberally. And it just gives you that option to flex into 5-piece and 8-piece. Storm Rage Spalders, or Storm Rage Bracers. So For these, they're just very similar to Braces of Royal Redemption, just 20 healing down basically, and they have superior stats, so not much to say there. This is basically just to get the 3-set going, right? So that's why we have that. For the Scepter, Scepter of the False Prophet, just by far the best, as well as the Satura's Might. But again, Lay of the Life Giver is kind of fantastic here. Another decent option is definitely the Augur Staff if you can't get your hands on this stuff. It's even better on Druid than, I would say, Priest in a comparative sense, in the sense that, like, you know, for Priest, you're upgrading from a pretty decent item to a pretty decent item, where on Druid, you may actually be upgrading from a really bad item to a pretty decent item if you're getting the Augur Staff. So it's worth keeping that in mind. The Regalia, a lot of times, isn't highly sought after, especially if you can kind of find your way into high-tier runs. Like, there's a lot of guild runs, obviously, that force people to get rank 14 and things of that sort, okay? But not that many, realistically, I guess. Like, most of the guilds, they're still not, like, forcing people. There's going to be, like, in a lot of guilds, there's going to be, you know, like, probably, like, 3 or 4 players that have rank 14, maybe a little bit more, which was a big improvement over 2019 Classic, but it's still not anywhere close to the whole raid. Whereas, you know, if you are pugging, sometimes you can actually find these, like, really strong pugs, because top guilds that want to run pugs to either gear their alts or kind of sub their main in and hard reserve things, a lot of times alts from the guild will join those runs. Those people are highly motivated. Their alts are going to be geared. So you can kind of find runs where people aren't really rolling on things like Regalia and Armaments as much, which means that you have a better shot at getting something like the Augur Staff here. So just something to keep in mind. Okay. Storm Rage, Handguard. So this is one I really like. You know, it's just a great piece of armor. It's a set piece, and it's got good healing on it. Can't really ask for more. So this is, like, arguably probably the best piece of Druid tier, and it's obviously the hardest one to get, actually, as well. Grasp of the Old God, by far just the best belt. Can't really compete with the mana per 5 there. Storm Rage Leggings. Now, this is interesting. I'm going to talk about an alternative option here in a moment, but we're just going to go through the rest of the list, and then I'll bring up the option. But these are really strong. I personally kind of like them better than Empowered Leggings, although Empowered Leggings are very, very close. And, you know, depending on what you're doing, you might want the crit. And the thing you have to think about on Druid, and this is something that I normally start the video off with, but I guess we'll just get into it here, is that what you're really trying to do from my perspective is you kind of want to go for the max healing setup. It's not as bad as Paladin. You don't really, you know, want to give up every point of MP5 to get max healing, but you sort of do a little bit, because the more healing you get, you turn your rank 4 healing touch into just an absolute weapon of war. Like, this thing will just carry you so hard. It's so mana efficient. You can make it incredibly mana efficient too, depending on how you spec. You can have like 18% reduced mana cost on it, on a spell that already doesn't cost all that much mana, and it's hitting for like large amounts. You know what I mean? So yeah, I do tend to favor the a little bit more healing power, and we'll talk about how you can do some swaps here in a moment. Boots of Pure Thought are very solid. This is another potential option you can swap out. Then we have Pure Elementium Band of the Martyr. Pretty non-controversial here, I think. Obviously, just get the ZG set if you can't get these. Rejuvenating Gem, by far the best. The Druid has an interesting choice here, where I feel like if you're the type of player that is leaning very heavily into healing touch spam, I actually do kind of like using your Dire Maul trinket, because it's so much healing. Right, it really is so much healing. I find that using things like, you know, the Heart of Fakar are not as good on Druid unless you're going to combine them with something like Regrowth, you know, or you're going to do like a Rejuve spam thing where you're kind of like snapshotting the buff and putting it out a bunch of times so you have it on hot. So in those situations, very strong trinket. And I would swap it in absolutely for something like a Royal Seal. But if I wasn't doing that, if I was doing the more healing touch style of play, I wouldn't really worry too much about trying to juice my healing touches with with the Heart of a Car because it's just very difficult to actually get them to consistently hit to begin with. So when you're not consistently hitting them, you're losing a lot of value on the trinket. And every time you cast, you're obviously losing more value with the Heart of a Car, right? So it's something you have to keep in mind. Heart of a Car tends to work better with stuff like Rejuvenation because you know you're going to get at least a percentage of the ticks most of the time, as well as the fact that with Regrowth, you have a very quick casting Regrowth. So that's the kind of like the philosophy there. Going into the idol, so it kind of depends. If you're a really big Rejuve user, then the Rejuvenation idol is good. I would probably stick to the Healing Touch idol because I'm a Healing Touch spammer, and I'm going to make a video on how I personally play Druid, where we kind of get into this more, but that's what I would do with idol. So let's talk a little bit about the 2 set here and why we chose things that we did. And I think the gloves are non-controversial, right? The bracers are pretty non-controversial because you're only losing 20 healing. That's about the best you're ever going to get from dropping from like a really high quality AQ or Blackwing Lair equivalent item down to a tier item. Okay, so the bracers are very solid. The handguards are very solid. Where it gets a bit sketchy is the pants, because something else you can do here is you can swap in the empowered leggings, okay? And then you gain a decent amount of healing there, all right? And then you can also swap in the chest guard, okay? So that becomes pretty interesting because remember, the crit here is kind of making up for the lack of throughput that we're sort of losing, and you get a lot of raw stats, obviously, on the chest guard. So you can do something like this if you wanted. Especially if you really like the idea of stacking crit. If you really like to stack crit, you don't mind losing a little bit of plus healing, you could even sub in the Storm Rage boots in this case, right? But you wouldn't really have a good alternative to swap the gloves out for, so maybe you just run 4-set or something like that. But I think definitely if you're running 3-piece only, if that's the only thing you really care about, right, then you tend to want to keep the Lost Hat. You tend to want to keep the shoulders, and you tend to want to use the belt here because it's so good. So that leaves you with like the gloves, the pants, the chest, and the bracers to kind of work with, and also the boots. A lot of people don't have Boots of Pure Thought, so if you don't have Boots of Pure Thought, then Storm Rage boots become an easy shoe-in. And I would probably just use Storm Rage boots over something like this because of the 1% crit, right? So yeah, I'm not really... I don't really care about locking in this set too much. The main configurations I would use is this one that we currently see in front of us, or again we go back to the Storm Rage setup here, right, and we go Robes of the Guardian Saint. So either one of those is fine. One thing to keep in mind is that if you go this configuration, it's one less item out of a queue. So if you do already have the pants, right, then it kind of really makes sense to use this configuration. So keep in mind what you have as well, right? So that's basically the 3-piece. Let's go to the 5-piece. Now the 5-piece, in my opinion, is not really that bad or that much of a departure. I would actually kind of put this basically on par or equivalent to this tier, this setup here. And you could argue that this is actually a more flexible setup, right? Because again, so the chest, we don't really lose that much from going chest here, right? It's fine. So we're gaining a +1. And in this particular case, we swapped out the shoulders for the Storm Rage to get our 5-piece. But again, if you, let's say you had the shoulders, right, because you were running MC a lot, you finally got them, you don't have Boots of Pure Thought, you could just easily swap these out. So you go back to Wild Growth here, and you go back to Boots of Storm Rage boots here, right? So you can run the 5-set either way here in this configuration. Basically, nothing else is going to change about the BiS stuff, so that's why we're just talking about the tier pieces. And this is a really strong option because you can kind of do a couple things. Let's kind of walk into the talents here. So let's imagine a full restoration spec, okay? Let's put all the possible points you could want into restoration, like realistically speaking, okay? And we're gonna actually put some points in here because we're gonna want the Fairy Fire range. You don't necessarily need the Fairy Fire range, but it's something that you probably do want. Okay, so we get 3 extra points here, so we put them in here. Now we basically, if you notice, we have everything that we care about in Restoration and everything that we care about in Balance by going the spec. Okay, and the main thing is we're picking up 5 out of 5 regrowth. So if you run this sort of spec, like a full Resto spec, and you run the 5-piece here, you actually have a lot of utility. You can play very like casual, safe Swiftmend spec, like you can react off your rejuvenation hots, right? You can use Swiftmend in tandem with regrowth, so you spam a bunch of regrowths, then you're using the Swiftmend to heal off the back of that, okay? You can go just full regrowth spam. You still have the option to go regrowth spam. It's not going to be quite as effective as if you had Moonglow, right? Because your regrowths aren't, or your rejuves aren't quite as mana efficient, but you still have the healing on them, okay? So this spec kind of allows you to really, take advantage of every aspect of the kit, and when you combine that with the 5-piece, it gives you a lot of flexibility. Like on a certain portion of the raid, without swapping your spec, you could just be like, oh, I'm going to regrowth spam here, okay, I'm going to rejuve spam here, I'm going to conserve mana, healing touch spam in this section. Like you can really mix it up. So I really don't mind this, and you don't really lose much from the other setup. If we see, we got 1140 here and 29% crit, right, with like 9.4k mana and 102 MP5, so not, we don't lose much MP5, we don't really lose that much healing, we lose like 60 healing, and we actually gain some mana in the other set, right, so we actually lose some mana here, so not a bad configuration between the two. Now, the third one is where you basically just use all Storm Rage gear, and this you can see immediately you're paying a bit of a heavier penalty at full BiS, okay? So you're dropping like 160 healing, something like that. You do have more mana, which is good. You have more spirit, so I don't want to completely downplay that. You do lose a little bit of MP5, but it's sort of made up a little bit with the spirit, not like totally, obviously. So this is an interesting option. You're basically using it to get the extra tick on rejuvenation, which basically makes it 100 spell coefficient spell, so it, like your plus healing goes into a 1-to-1 at that point. And for this, I would just say it really just depends on how often you're able to make full use of rejuvenation. It's kind of the same with the 5 set, although like I said, the 5 set at least has the chance to be more flexible. But in terms of using the hots, I would put it like this. So I was in a run the other day, and the Druid actually did quite well on the overall. Granted, I lost my buffs in a really stupid fashion, thanks to the wasps. The poison was cleansed, but I died anyway. And this Druid, since I didn't have any buffs, was like kind of really pumping on healing. And he was basically spamming regrowth with Heart of Fakar augmented. And it's effective, right? However, it will you very quickly, even if you downrank the regrowth appropriately, which means that if you're in a guild where that night we were basically kind of just creeping, we were doing 1 pack, we were sitting and drinking, doing 1 pack, sitting and drinking. It was basically like that. It wasn't super slow, but this guy basically had ample time to remax in between most major packs, I would say, right? And that was a big key to his success, because if he didn't have that time, even without world buffs, I would have destroyed him. So the moment you start pressing W more, the harder it is to incorporate these heals like regrowth, because you're basically paying the price of inefficiency when you use them, but it's kind of like you're not paying the price when you're in a run like I was in yesterday, because you're always sitting down to drinking, right? So you're never getting punished for the mana that you're wasting. Whereas if you're in a guild that's just go, 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 you're absolutely getting shredded, even if you innervate yourself, right? You don't have enough innervates to keep up with the demand. That's how mana-hungry regrowth is. And like I said, obviously it's kind of even weird using innervate on yourself when you could use it on something else like a priest. Because if you're like, you have to think about it like as if you're acquiring your innervate to even keep up with the priest, okay? So you're basically using your innervate on yourself to keep up with the priest. The priest is doing the solo with no innervate, so obviously the priest is going to get way more effective value out of your innervate than you will, is basically how you want to think of that. Because I know a lot of people were beating me up in the last Druid video where they're like, well, why would I give my innervate? And it's like, well, because it's obvious, right? The priest is just using the mana way better 90% of the time. But again, you know, if you're in a kind of like a slower guild where you are going to have that time to remax, then this playstyle can be pretty effective, and the rejuvenation style becomes more effective as well. So this is something you could opt into. Personally, I wouldn't go more than, 5-piece. I'd probably be very comfortable running 5-piece on my Druid, and outside of that, I wouldn't really care, right? I wouldn't try and go 8 out of 8. So that's just my thoughts. I'm going to talk a little bit about the last thing, the Scarab Brooch here, right? So this is fine. I don't believe it interacts with HOTS, but, you can still get a decent amount of, like a big chunk of healing off if you're using the regrowth spec, right? Because you're critting basically 80% of the time when you have full world buffs. So it's not a bad trinket on Druid. It's something to consider. Like I said, though, you kind of have really good options already. You have the Dire Maul trinket just for a lot more throughput, right? Then you have things like Harder for Car, which, keep in mind, when you do Harder for Car, you're getting the extra healing not only on the part that's hitting up front for your regrowth, but you're getting it on the hot end as well. Right now, we've talked about in the hot video, you're not getting all those ticks from the regrowth hot, but for the ones you are getting the bonus, right? So it's not like it's completely ineffective. Same thing for rejuve, you're basically like snapshotting it, so that can be pretty good as well. So yeah, that's basically the video. Covered all of the possible options, I think, and I hope it was helpful. So if this helped you guys, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys next time.